Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Christiana Best, host and creator of the podcast Inside Out, Outside In. This podcast was developed for and by colleges and universities. It is guided by the themes of diversity, inclusion, and equity. The goal of the podcast is to educate, inform, build community, and inspire change while centering the voices and experiences of people of color. The contents of this podcast do not represent any college or university. Today, we're celebrating Dr. King's birthday. And in honor of his birthday, I'd like to begin by sharing one of his quotes and to talk to you a little bit about it. And then I'm going to follow by asking you to share a quote and um, share how it resonates with you and tell the audience a little bit about yourself. So the quote that I have selected, it says, "If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way." And I think this podcast is a small thing that's hopefully will move people to change in our environment, racial change, racial justice, social changes. So that's pretty much what I was thinking of. And I will start from my left to my right, starting with Dana McDonald.
Hello, everyone. My quote is if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. I think that is very important, especially everything that's going on in the world today, especially with COVID 19. It was very easy for people to make excuses to sit still. Um, and however slow you're moving, you must continue to push forward. So that quote has always had a very good place in how I run my professional and personal life.
Great, thank you. Can you share with the audience a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Dana McDonald. I am a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Epsilon Omicron Omega chapter, located here in Greater Hartford. I'm the immediate past president of the local chapter here. I am also oh wow, over about a 25-year IT professional. I currently am working in the aerospace industry, and I reside in the greater Hartford area with my two daughters.
Great, thank you for joining us. Next is Dr. Vernell.
I'm Fiona Vernal. I'm a professor of history and Africana studies at the University of Connecticut, associate professor of history. The same quote resonates with me, but I think I'm all right um, with piggybacking onto what Dana has to say. But what resonated with me wasn't just about the idea of what excuses are there, but the idea that everyone can contribute something, right? So the people who fly, the people who can walk, the people who can run, and the people who have to crawl. I think Dr. King was so magnanimous and had such a tremendous respect for what everyone could contribute to civil rights. And I think that he would be um, so pleased to see the way that everyone is coming together, for young people, old people, people from all across the United States in this particular moment to take our democracy back.
Thank you for that. Joanna?
Hi. Um, so the quote I picked is "The time is always right to do what is right." I think that's important and really relevant right now as we see an extension of the civil rights movement basically happening before us. And I typically find myself in spaces surrounded by white people as a person of color. So I always make sure to make my stance and make it clear and not silence myself, and to do what is right in any time or any space that I'm in. And I think we're teaching our youth that by giving ourselves a voice and giving other people a voice so they can continue to continue that movement.
Great. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I live in Hartford. I was a project concern student that was bused, not shipped, to West Hartford Public Schools. So my goal right now is to continue working in the Hartford community. So to help better our school systems and our communities by participating in various community nonprofits. And I just started my career in teaching, and I'm getting my master's in education hopefully soon.
Great,
And
great.
my parents are immigrants from Guyana.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Professor Brittany Yancey.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I selected a quote. I actually posted it this morning that says, "Freedom is never voluntarily granted by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." And I couldn't think of a better quote to post in this moment when we understand the power of the people and that we have the power to reclaim not only our humanity, our communities, and our country for ourselves. And I look forward to continuing that work and stepping into that power. Just a little bit about me. I am a historian. I am an assistant professor of humanities at Goodwin University. I am also completing my doctorate at the University of Connecticut, so it's so great to share space with Dr. Vernal. I look at race and gender in the United States, and particularly interested in Black women's intellectual and social history. So this is really a conversation that I love to have. I also have been involved in the community. I am the Greater Hartford Ambassador for the United States of Women, which is a nonprofit organization that is committed to intersectional fight for gender equity. I also work with CT Black Women, which is a grassroots campaign here in the state. And I am a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Epsilon Omicron Omega chapter. And so it is also great to be with my past president, Dana Mcdonald. And so I consider this to be among friends and family here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you. All right. I'm going to move over to Rayna White.
Hello, everyone. And Dr. Best, thank you so much for having me. My name is Rayna Dayton White. I am a licensed attorney. I have a long career doing social economic justice work, community outreach work before I was licensed. My mother is a social worker in the area. She was actually the first female vice president of the Greater Hartford Urban League chapter. And at a very young age, she very thankfully got my yappy self into public speaking. So shout out to social work parents and their infinite patience. But through my teen years and through my college years, I attended Morgan State University and then Howard. I was always watching the programs that I was supposed to get involved with get defunded. That was hard, right? I was definitely an 80s, 90s kid, right? I was told that if I, stayed the straight arrow, I was also bussed out to West Hartford and did all of these things, that we would be fine and that this was really important and that I needed to show up. But then I would watch these programs again get cut off, get defunded, they would end abruptly, all of these things that to me just didn't show a long-term interest in my community. I started off as a sociology major at Morgan, and I thought I was going to go get an MSW. I thought I was going to be like an MSW or maybe a master's in human services. But the remedies that really were available for social ills lied in law. And so I found myself in law school at Howard University. And that has really been the gist of my work. I'm not so much a litigator as I am someone who really went there to understand legislative systems, funding systems, social systems, and how we can better access them, as well as kind of understand how our government was set up and what we've been promised and been told are our rights. With that said, my MLK quote, my Dr. King quote is, "New laws are not enough. The emergency we now face is economic, and it is a desperate and worsening situation. For the 35 million poor people in America, there is a kind of strangulation in the air. In our society, it is murder, psychologically, to deprive a man of a job or an income. You are in substance saying to that man that he has no right to exist."
Oh,
My work is really to remove the disparities in access. And I thank you so much for having me here today. I chose to go to 2 HBCUs because I would never make my grandmother suffer the indignity of writing a check to an institution that she could not attend because she covered my tuition.
thank you for sharing that. It's really important stuff. Connecting to our ancestors and connecting to some of Dr. King's, messages, which resonates today, right? Yeah. Shanice, last but certainly not least.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. The Martin Luther King quote that I chose is, "Lightning makes no sound until it strikes." And I picked that quote because it speaks to community organizing. We must, if we are to make a powerful strike, we must come together and organize. We must be tactful. We must be cunning, and we must not be too loud about it either. So I picked that because I consider myself a future organizer. So I'll be taking our ancestor, Dr. Martin Luther King's quote here with me as I embark on that journey. And a little bit about me. I live in Hartford, Connecticut, and I worked 4 years as a case manager, connecting community members to basic needs resources. As a case manager, you definitely get to see how well our society works, aka how not well it works. Yeah, so those stories, being so close to them, really impacted me and my work, even though I was close to it myself, being an immigrant here, moving from Trinidad to the US. I was very close to those issues as well. So I learned a lot being a case manager due to COVID related budget cuts. I was actually let go from that position, a role that's kind of important in the community if you're given enough resources. Um, but so I was let go from that, but right now I'm pursuing my passion of tutoring Spanish for ages 11 plus. So I'm excited. It was a blessing in disguise for me. If anyone is interested in those services, you can email me at speakspanish22@gmail.com. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah, you can actually put it in the chat so everyone can see it.
Oh, okay.
And I know some of you might have younger children and you're interested in having them learn Spanish. This is another opportunity for that. So this is great. Thank you. I'm really excited about today's topic. We're talking about Black women and women of color's leadership within the context of the pandemic, the most recent election we've had, which has been like no other, and also in the role of advocacy. When I first started, well, actually, when myself and Sneha and Smitha started planning this episode, the person that came to mind was Kamilah Harris, because she has one of the most significant leadership role in this country today, as of Wednesday, right? And she's been a leader all along. Some people like her, some people don't, but she is a leader and she identifies as African American. She has a parent who is from the West Indies, Jamaica specifically, and another who is from India. She attended an SBCU and she is a member of AKA, right? So I wanted to have a variety of people who represented those different areas, and to talk about leadership with her as the one leading. But also, I wanted to recognize some other women who has been significant, particularly around the election, and that's Stacey Abrams, and Keisha Lance Bottoms, right? So those have been women who have risen to the occasion, and women who we can say are excellent role models to all girls, particularly Black girls and girls of color. Um, but I kind of want to set the stage because so much has happened in 2020. I mean, we can't deny this has been an unprecedented year. For some, it's been devastating. Um, for example, at this point, we have lost, as a result of the pandemic, over 388,000 people have been killed, has lost their lives. Even though we have a vaccine, it has been slow in the distribution, and there are lots of controversies around it. The Just to sort of paint a picture as it relates to jobs, I mean, Shanice shared that she lost her job, but the unemployment rate in April of 2020 was 14.8% overall, but it was 16.8% for Black people in this country. Today, it has gone down quite a bit. Overall, it's 6.7, but it's still 12.4% for Black people. So it's still very high. And I mean, that saying about when America sneezes, Black people get a cold. I'm not sure if I'm correct with it, but that's clearly an example of it. We know that the wage gap for women there's an incredible disparity overall, with Black women getting, being at the bottom of it. Again, so we need to talk about those things. This past spring and summer, we've had a tremendous amount of racial trauma as a result of the killing of Black bodies, many of which we've seen on camera or heard about it through the news. Two names I'm lifting up is Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. But that also helped us to understand the movement of Black Lives Matter. And it helped other Americans, particularly those from the dominant culture, to understand and see, I think, the systemic issues that are clearly has been operating for people of color, particularly for Black people, for a long time. But it provided them with an opportunity to really see it between the movement of Black Lives Matter and the impact of the pandemic. I don't think there's anybody in America who can say that they don't understand systemic racism. And then, of course, towards the end of 2020, we had the most contentious election ever that I've ever seen, and I've been living here a long time. So we had the presidential election, and we also had the congressional elections, and it sort of came to a head in two different places. South Carolina during the primaries for Biden, which again, Black people put him over, helped him to get to the point where he became the nominee, the Democratic nominee. And again, during the senatorial election, the runoff that took place in Georgia, Stacey Abrams and Keisha Lance Bottoms were significant in pushing and helping. And again, Black people in general and people of color were the ones that made the difference in the results of the election. And I think we can say that. So Black people have showed up, irrespective of how much they have been devastated by the pandemic and the racial trauma that has occurred. And so I am looking forward to 2021, even though we started with a bang with this insurrection that occurred. I am very, very hopeful that we would reap the rewards of the work that we've done to get people to where they need to be. And by that, I mean to get the Biden-Harris win in the executive branch and to also get the senatorial win to get rid of Mitch and to get, what's his name from New York in place. I'm forgetting his name right now. All right, so with that said, I'd like to start by asking you, 2020, and I'm going to read the question. So I mentioned Stacey Abrams and Keisha Lance Bottoms. They have been engaged in a lot of grassroots organizing. How do you think this plays a role in the 2020 election? What are some of the other groups that are missing from this list? And by that I mean, sorry, Stacey Abrams, Keisha, and the Black Lives Matter. Are there any other groups that are not, I have not highlighted, but more than anything else, to what extent do you see their leadership role helping us through this very difficult pandemic and the election? I'm going to start with Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for hosting this. As I was thinking about the questions, I know it's easy it's easy for us to bask in the glory of this current moment, right? But I think what the examples of Stacey Abrams or Keisha Lance Bottoms demonstrates is the work. We shouldn't forget the work, because Black women have been so pivotal in making good on the meaning of citizenship, right? And then making good on the true meaning of democracy, right? So although we're celebrating these women in this particular moment now, they're sitting on the shoulders of so many other women. And as a historian, right, no one's going to be surprised that I'm going to say something about that. I might bring up somebody like Shirley Chisholm or Ella Baker and all of the other women who have brought us here. These particular women are prominent, but Black women have always been there on the front lines, making sure that the true meaning of participation and the true meaning of representation for American democracy, making sure that America lives up to that principle. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there are other groups that are missing. The groups that are missing for me, or what's missing for me, are the historical figures, right? The Shirley Chisholms and the Ella Bakers of the world, who've really played an important role in the Democratic Party and in pushing our politics forward, whether they were flying or crawling or walking, as Martin Luther King said.
Great, thank you for reminding us of that. I do have a question about the ancestors, but we're going to get to that later. So I'm going to go to Rayna White.
I won't infringe upon the Divine Nine territory, and I think some other people who want to comment on the strength of that movement in terms of the influence that it played. But I will say that it was very apparent in my world, so I was happy to see that. But I do think HBCUs played a large role in this. First of all, I've worn something with Howard every single day since she's won. Earlier today, I didn't put it on this particularly, but I was absolutely in a Bison, like old gray t-shirt, cleaning up all day today, every single day, even if it's my Howard pin, because I think what we forget about HBCUs is who and what they produce. Let's be clear, Howard now holds Thurgood Marshall and Kamilah Harris. How many of the other institutions short of your Harvards, your Princetons, your Yales can say that they have Supreme Court and Vice President alumni? So I think that HBCUs have always just been so small but mighty, but they really are this large reflection of just, I think, the African diaspora spirit across the board. And that's what makes HBCUs so powerful. Because all of us living right in our own little world, thinking we're the only ones, oh God. And then you come here and everybody pretty much is just about on the same page. That's what was nice for me. I went and found other Black middle-class children whose parents had also heavily threatened them about behaving in college. And so I was able to have a little tribe and off we went, in terms of strong expectations. But that's what it was. You don't feel alone. But once all of us are then together and you don't have those outside pressures, it's amazing what can happen. So the HBCU community, I think, played a heavy pivotal role in terms of all of the social media information, all of the voting information, really making sure that we were mobilized, asking us about fundraisers. I mean, I couldn't go anywhere near my social media without my alumni pages letting me know that we were in the midst of an election. And even before, when Kamilah Harris was running for president, I didn't realize that that wasn't common knowledge, that she had ran for president. In my world, it was, I donated. Yeah. But I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful to have that little bit of bubble, because especially living here in New England, living in the Northeast, when you step outside of it, you're very harshly reminded that these are groups, and that without all of us really actively working within those groups, we don't get the traction. So I will say that I think HBCUs played a huge part in that, and churches. I'll give Black churches their due across the board, from the storefronts to the mega churches. They really stepped up to the plate and said it's time for us to get on the ball again, and that was nice to hear, because it became very clear to us over the last 4 years that other pulpits were being galvanized for other purposes, and I'm happy that we reclaimed ours.
Thank you for that. Joanna.
Hello, thank you also for having me and for having this program. Kind of piggybacking off of Fiona and Rayna. Fiona first, people that get lost in history. One of my favorite role models was always B Wells Barnett. She published the Red Record and was one of the first people to publicize lynchings in America in the early civil rights movement. And she, as a woman and a Black woman, had a lot of pushback during this time period. And I can't imagine she would, if that were today, she would definitely get the same pushback, which is crazy. You would think in 2021 we would be able to appreciate the news of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but there's pushback from the other side. So I think highlighting certain women that really helped the civil rights movement in the beginning would be helpful now too, as well. So thank you, Fiona, for reminding me of that. Yeah, I use B Wells' reference and quotes all the time. Even I think she's part of my passwords. And for I think, like, going off of what Rayna was saying, grassroots workers, community organizers were a big part of what the success that Stacey Abrams and Lance had, and in the South in Georgia, turning out 18-year-olds, everyone who was a part of colleges, who was turning out new voters, and having those discussions, and labor unions as well. I worked for SEIU here, 1199, and had helped with Working Families Party as well. And I know the work they did at the doors on the ground really helped turn Hartford help the turnout here in Hartford and Bridgeport and all over Connecticut. So I can't imagine the scale of what they did nationally. Being involved in churches as well, and healthcare, as well as with teachers as also.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So I'll go to Dana, Sharice, and then Brittany next.
I definitely want to piggyback on what Rayna said about HBCUs. As a proud graduate of Dillard University, it was just phenomenal how you saw nationally the different alumni groups and people who are not officially in the alumni group, but all band together, whether it was to spread the word in the various states on the local level, or just to mobilize and donate to make things happen. So I will touch a little bit on the importance of the Divine Nine in all of the fraternities and sororities, especially Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Just a little bit, I will let Professor Yancey, as our immediate past connections and social justice lead here in the Hartford area, kind of touch on some of the things that we put together locally that were just amazing. I've been in Connecticut about 20 years, and only in the last few years have I actually seen the Divine Nine organizations here locally really band together and collaborate and a united front to put together programs and on the ground initiatives and events to get voters registered and get people out to the polls. For me, that was probably the biggest thing that just made me feel really nice, warm, and fuzzy inside, was to really see the African American population here really working together and not against each other or as if it's a competition. So definitely my focus would be let's not forget about the D9 organizations that definitely all chipped in and got behind donating and on the ground grassroots, getting people registered, getting people to the polls, educating people on elections, and just reiterating that your voice counts. As Dr. Vernal said, it doesn't matter if you're running, walking, or crawling, everyone has something to contribute. And I do believe that we really saw that in this past election season.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go to Shanice and to Brittany next, but I just want to say, I feel like I've missed out by not going to an HBCU and not joining a sorority. I really feel like that I missed something.
It's not too late. You can still join a sorority.
Yeah,
That's what
actually,
I keep
you really
hearing.
can.
At my age, I don't know.
You might be surprised.
Okay. Shanice?
Yes. So in answering your question, what does Stacey Abrams and Keisha Lance Bottoms all have in common, and how did they contribute? They were powerhouses organizing on the grassroots levels to mobilize their community. So a lot of power to them for their commitment, because it's not easy work, it's not fun work, but they're doing it. I'm lucky enough to know some women like that in my community as well. And how did this play a role in the 2020 elections? Well, based on what I've learned, is that they brought voters out there to vote for, the Democratic Party. So they're having us place our trust back into the Democratic Party. It was Republican, now it's Democrats. And we kind of play this Democrat-Republican game. I offer a bit more critical view of that Democrat, Republican. How come we only have two main parties that we only hear about? And if things are systemic, that means anyone can come and be the forefront, be the president, be the vice president. But how much power are they going to have if things are systemically racist? So for me, it looks like a great strategic play by our oppressors and by this capitalist structure that we have to place a woman of color as the vice president. I'm surprised they didn't try to place a Black person. Given all the unrest, it would have been great. But they gave us something to hold us down. And that's how I viewed it, as a very great strategic move.
Okay. Thank you for that, Shanice. Okay, Professor Yancey.
Yes. Like I just echo everything that everyone has said. Black women have been on the front lines for centuries. And I 100% agree with Dr. Vernal that we must place that in the historical context. When we look at the fact that Black women are the most consistent voting bloc in the United States, we are that 98% that shows up to the polls, right? That is not just about 2020 or 2016 or 2018. That belongs to a long tradition of Black women consistently being engaged, pushing the conversation about democracy forward, pushing the conversation about citizenship forward, organizing in our communities. When I think about Stacey Abrams, Keisha Lance Bottom, first and foremost, they are graduates of HBCUs, right? And so you're talking about Spelman, you're talking about FAMU. I graduated from Hampton University. Totally proud when I look at just the lineup of organizers in this 2020 election cycle who were graduates of all types of HBCUs, really bringing that power to the forefront. But I do think that there are some women and organizations that also need to be part of this conversation. Glenda Carr and Higher Heights for America they are the founders of the Black Women's Lead movement. They are investing in the citizenship, leadership of Black women, the civic engagement and leadership of Black women. I actually just got my box today that they put together in commemoration of this historic election in the coming forth of our VP-elect Kamilah Harris. Other organizations, Alicia Garza in the Black Futures Lab, Tamika Mallory in Unsold Freedom, Latasha Brown and Black Voters Matters, NSAY UFOT in the New Georgia Project, Helen Butler in the Peeples Agenda, Melanie Campbell in the Black Women's Roundtable, Stephanie Young in When We All Vote. I mean, when we talk about the Divine Nine, I mean, you know, our organizations were founded, right, out of this, the mere fact that our communities needed a response. And the women who were at Howard, who were at Indiana University, Butler University, excuse me, in terms of Sigma Gamma Rho, I mean, we're talking about women who felt that they could respond to their communities. And so our chapter here in Hartford, we joined the Divine Nine in organizing voter registrations despite COVID. We joined the rallies that were happening across Connecticut. We hosted town halls. On our chapter particularly hosted a town hall with our Secretary of the State. You know, we put together for Election Day, we partnered with Lyft and a car service locally to provide transportation to the polls. And so, you know, the Divine Nine has always played a historic role. We have been lobbyists. We have organized our communities around job security, around voting registration in particular. Some of our leaders for Alpha Kappa Alpha, you're talking about Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, women of the movement who have led. And so when we look at our soror, Kamilah Harris, yes, we are excited because we feel that the tradition of Black women leading runs so deep in this country that we must celebrate. All of us should be celebrating. And it doesn't mean that we have won. This is not our destination. We have much work to do, and we will hold everyone accountable, including our soror. And so we know that, this is a tense time, but it is a time to really, celebrate the organizing power of Black people and people of color, and particularly Black women and women of color.
Great. Well said. Thank you very much. Wow. A lot was mentioned here. I have a question on the ancestors. I think you guys mentioned quite a bit of them. But I'm just going to ask a couple of you to respond to this. What do you think our ancestors will be saying? I have mentioned, I have a couple of them that I want to mention. Well, certainly starting with Dr. King, Malcolm, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Sojourner Truth, Rosa Parks, and I don't want to leave out Winnie Mandela. But I mean, what do you think they will be saying now at this point? I know we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think we can actually say we can breathe now because we were really under duress for the last 4 years and things didn't work out too well for us prior to that either. But I am very hopeful. So, starting with Fiona, what do you think our ancestors would say? And if you want to add an ancestor to this list, you can certainly do so, as you guys started to do anyway.
I don't think the ancestors would say that we can breathe now. I'm just gonna pick Nelson Mandela because I'm a South African historian, and I think what Nelson Mandela would have to say to us is don't take your eyes off of that ball, because the work is only now continuing, right? And the same kind of mobilization and excitement and vision and joy and sense of empowerment or sense of duty and urgency that got us to this point, that we have to put in extra work to make sure that we keep that momentum, right? I mean, there've been what, 2 Black women who've served in the Senate? Like, we have a long way. We have a really long way to go. So I think Nelson Mandela would say, keep the momentum going, and all of the mobilization that went into this moment, when the media stops paying attention, right? When the joy and the excitement is gone, that we should continue with that hard work. And that's going to take all of the community organizers, right? That Brittany has mentioned. The work will continue before, when there will be no glory, there'll be no media, but the work has to continue in the background to keep the momentum going.
Gotcha. Thank you. Rayna?
So what would our ancestors say? I'm gonna just go back to my own family, because we have a long history with HBCUs and with doing this type of work. Because I mean, if you're trying to go to college back in the day, you pretty much are you're an activist, whether or not you want to be. You're just trying to study engineering, but it doesn't go so smoothly. And I'm very thankful that I have that. I think I would just like to echo Fiona's statement of, okay, this is good, but continue to do the work. We're not striving for a one and done. We're not striving for this kind of endpoint. We're striving for long-term sustainability, right? We're striving for this to become the norm. And if there's anything I could think of, I would say, remember the time period after Reconstruction and how everybody, right, yeah, and then they just set everything on fire and kind of made it very clear that was not going to last, that was not going to be. I could see that happening again. I actually kind of felt like that after the Obama administration ended and we started to see these very aggressive actions, policies, movements to make sure that the oppressive status quo was maintained.
Okay.
So, you know, my grandmother is 92, and she's actually a college graduate, and you know, and was a member of SG, well, is a member of SGRO, and went to, I mean, back then there was no choice, but she went to a HBCU, Kentucky State. And, you know, she said, I grew up in a house without electricity. And then I got on my cell phone that we have a female vice president. So, you know, that doesn't happen because people got comfortable. That happened because she got a high school diploma that said colored on it and still went forward to college no matter what. And she, when her daughter was part of the Brown v. Board decision, and I have a picture of my mother as the only Black girl in her class, but she sent her there and oiled her hair and taught her to say pomade and not grease, and did her best, and sent her to school in Edison, New Jersey. It happened because my mother then did the same for me, and she put me on the bus to West Hartford and said, don't worry about it. I promise I'll be here when you get back. It will be okay. As well as then put me on buses to Morgan and Howard. So we're looking at 90 years, right, of work just to be here, just for this little bit. I think we should really look at it as a long-term sustainability effort. And I think our ancestors would really want to tell us that. At least the ones that I have that are still with me have made that very clear.
Excellent. Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you. Thinking about my ancestors from India and West Africa, getting on a slave ship, not knowing what was to come, where they were going or what they were doing. And I think I researched there was only like six women of color, Black and Indian, on one of those boats to procreate more slaves. Yeah, they would definitely tell us all to keep going. You know, it's that iceberg analogy where it's like you see the iceberg, but there's all that on the bottom that makes that iceberg stand. I think people who are Trump supporters will also teach us that their ancestors were pushing to keep their status quo to protect them, and they are working to protect their status quo to also protect them, and we're not a part of that. So we need to work to make sure we're a part of that. We all have a seat at the table, and that our voices are heard, and we're not just having diversity and inclusion Zoom meetings, but actually putting that into action for our future as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one more person to answer that question, and I'll move to the next question, starting with Shanice. So, Dana, how would you like to respond to this?
Echo everything that has been said. Yes, this is great. It's a great victory. We should all be proud. But we have to keep moving forward. We have to realize that it took a lot of time, more time than it should have, to get to this point where you see a African American vice president-elect, a female vice president-elect. So I think our ancestors would be proud that we have gotten to this point, that their fight, their struggle did not fall on deaf ears. But I do believe that they are definitely saying, this is great, don't get comfortable, don't get too relaxed. There's still more work to do, and we must do. And it hopefully won't take us another 90 plus years to get there.
Yeah, I was getting a little sad there for a moment, Rayna, when you talked about 90 years. I mean, you know, I just want to breathe and relax and be, you know, and just, yeah. I mean, we've had to work so hard to get to this point, right? So first, let me just say, my next question is for the group, but I'm going to start with Brittany.
Shanice. Oh, I thought you said you're going to start with
Yeah,
Shanice.
I did say that, but I realized I also didn't call on Brittany, and I was going in that way, right?
Okay.
So the question I have is, what does it, what does it say about, when we talk about Black women and leadership roles? We know that a large number of Black women are caught up in the large unemployment rate that we see, right? That 12.4%. And in addition to that, we know that pay equity, there's such a great disparity with pay equity. Um, any ideas about how we can move forward in helping these women, many of whom are essential workers, right? They are anything, any suggestion in terms of, while I want to look at Black leaders and lift them up for all the hard work they've done, the women who are essential workers who are caught up in the unemployment rate, that large unemployment rate, or also can also be leaders wherever they land, wherever they are, even in their households, right? What do you think we would like Kamilah and others in leadership role to do to help these women?
One of the things that I think that sometimes we overlook is actually the power that we have in our own communities to make change. So why we will look to our elected officials at the state and the national level, that I think that sometimes we overlook the organizing power and leadership of the local organizers. So I think Shanice, I think she talked about um, working with the CEIU, right? And so I think about Rochelle Palachi, I think about Pamela Selders, I think about Takesha Everett and Health Equity Solutions, the YWCA Hartford region, Janice Fleming and Voices of Women of Color, right? These are women in our own communities right here on the ground who are supporting the essential workers, who are, helping women who are thinking about pursuing office, right? Helping them organize door knocking in the communities. When we talk about the pay equity situation in Connecticut, we have a serious problem with pay equity. If you look at the report of the National Women's Law Center, right, Connecticut is ranking like 40th in terms of particularly Black women and brown women in particular, right, will lose over $1 million living in Connecticut because of the pay equity issue, right? And so when we talk about what is needed, it's really getting with our communities and creating our own agenda, right? So right now, we are in a session, right? It opened up on January 6th, in fact, right? That historic day, right? And so it is getting in the offices and meeting with our elected officials, meeting with your state reps, meeting with your state senator, right? To say you need to build policy that centers me, right? And understanding my issues, my experience, my voice, they need to hear from us. Right. And so I think it really requires, when you say, well, how we can address the issues that impact us, right? That we need to build our own agenda that really centers Black and brown women in our communities, right, in a very intentional way. And so I think that's one way in which we can step forward. I have some other ideas, but I'll save that for the conversation, latter questions in the conversation. So I'm thinking about the role of local organizing power and really us building our own agenda that pushes and centers our experiences.
Great, great. Shanice, would you like to respond to that question?
Sure. Can you repeat the
Yeah,
question, the last
I put
part?
it in the chat. So the issue of pay equity for women of color is significant. they usually paid, I think, I want to say 30 something dollars on the dollar, with white men earning a dollar, you, um, and black women earning 30 something cents, something like that. So um, how can we, and I asked a question because we're talking about leadership and Black leadership. I see these women, while they may be working in different industries and in different positions on different levels, I see them as leaders as well. So how do we, and what can we do to help um, diminish or remove that pay equity, the disparity in pay equity that exists?
Oh, that's a huge one, and I do want to echo the previous speaker's sentiments that we really have to rely on our community to organize, but like not even to ask our oppressors, hey, can you please like pay us equally? We've been asking for years, like for centuries. Let's be treated as equals. So that's not working. So we're either going to have to um, smash the current system to, be more equitable for everyone, or we'll rely on community members to build up to that. For example, let's help so we're not feeling the economic burden as much of being paid less. Let's help each other out. Let's do like food, like give each other food. Let's get each other's phone numbers. Let's see, what do you need? What does your son or daughter need? Things like that. So I say definitely relying on the community, and we could also go to the route of like asking those rich, powerful people in power for that, but we've been doing that and that's not working out so well. That's very incremental. So, let's grow our own food. Let's say, hey, I got this from my garden. If you're lucky enough and be creative, maybe like push for cities, maybe like, hey, get different organizations that stay there for the community to donate community beds. Let's have some green space. Let's feed ourselves, because what they're feeding us as well is not so great. So to offset the economic burden of being paid less, I would say that we need to come together as a community. Like, let's do that work. It's not fun. We just, work 8 hours for not that much money, but then we still have to do the work if we can, if we're able to.
Great, thanks. So I wanted to talk about, while we have to do that, and that sounds like a really great short-term plan, um, we're tired of begging. We're tired of, like I grew up with a susu, right? I don't know if you guys know about the susu. When you couldn't buy that refrigerator, everybody brought their money together. And when you got it, you bought your refrigerator. Enough of that, right? We want to be able to, if we are joining the workforce, to be able to join it in a way that's respectful and equitable, right? So any ideas about that, Fiona and Rayna? And then I'll come to Dana.
I'm going to get a little personal, if you don't mind, in answering this
Sure.
question, because when you asked, I was thinking, what can the administration do while we have this little window of attention, right? And in the same way that we've been having these conversations about white allyship and what it means, and a lot of people who genuinely, right, said like they didn't know the extent, and finally, the Black Lives Matter protests and just and unrest across the country this summer has really legitimately opened up a lot of people's eyes. A lot of people's eyes are also finally open about the childcare crisis in this country, and so many women have, from all economic backgrounds, right, have had to leave the workplace because of the number of daycare facilities that are not open because of the pandemic, not necessarily because a lot of women can't afford it, but because those facilities are not open. And I think it shines a spotlight on the women who they don't have access to those facilities in their neighborhoods or their greater neighborhoods. So not only are there not facilities, the ones that are there are not affordable. And as someone who is very privileged, I have spent anywhere in the last, my eldest son is 21, and I have an 18-year-old and I have a 12-year-old. And in that time, I have spent anywhere from 35 to 40% of my income on childcare, because that's the only thing I could do to step into academia and function in academia. And I had to make fundamental decisions. Do I want to, so it's like 40% of my income, and then like the other 30%, right, is dealing with my student loans. And that's what Black women being underpaid means, even for those of us who happen to step into a little space of privilege because we happen to have gotten an education. And I hope that one of the major interventions that the administration can make, given the spotlight, is around affordable childcare for women so that they do not have to make those really difficult choices, and so that they can even have an opportunity to enter the workforce. And on the other flip side of that, to support Black women's entrepreneurial activities so that they don't have to grovel and be in certain kinds of workspaces that's never going to elevate them and lift them up and give them the appropriate pay. I think you're mute. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, no, I was trying to think of how to succinctly put this. I mean, what Dr. Best asked me is exactly what I do for a living to a certain extent. Okay, so let's First and foremost, one of the biggest issues is that women positions pay less. Our work is not valued. Teachers make less. Early childhood educators make less. HR makes less than IT. And biology is one of the lowest paying fields. I will tell you, as somebody who takes in gender complaints, they're letting everybody get access over there. Let's see how well my biochemical engineering students are faring. My mechanical female engineering students have fared, and what that looks like. So, I think first and foremost, when you just talk about gender down the line, we are truly relegated to lower paying positions. And we're also relegated, one of the things I think is interesting is this, into nonprofit positions. You'll find so we're in places that just don't have a lot of money. One of the things I think is interesting is that even when you look within those systems, when you do get to places where there are the more competitive salaries, they're still occupied by men. Education is one that is a glaring disparity. That's a really bad one. I mean, seriously, if you were to look at the number of men within the teaching profession, but then suss out the number of men within administrative professions, within the administrative positions, it just really goes there. So that's first and foremost. But the second part of this really is this. The government actually knows what all of us make because it has to get reported. The other piece of that 30 cents to the dollar is that even when we do then have people in the exact same position, our female mechanical engineer, our male mechanical engineer, for whatever reason, there's always some reason, you're correct, to pay this woman less. I think it's interesting that the IRS can audit to make sure that they got their money, but they can't audit to make sure that we got ours. If they were actually paying us more, they could tax more. Are you serious? Are you so racist and so misogynistic, you're just gonna cheat yourself out of dough? Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't even cost them anything because all they'd be doing is going back to private industries and saying, hey, those payroll audits, we couldn't help but to notice that within your organization, you have people who are within the same status and the same structure, but for some reason we have disparities in pay. And that's why you don't see it as much in public offices. They have the affirmative action plans force them to have to do their own audits all the time, not just around hiring, but in some areas around pay. And that is why you will oftentimes see us as women going into those public positions. The salaries are public. You can actually Google, not Google, but you can look up on Connecticut Transparency, all public employees' salary, from Malloy to the treasurer to the secretary at DPH. And it makes it a little bit more difficult. But what you'll also still note is that if you look at where we have female commissioners and male commissioners, with the exception of OPM, female commissioners are still largely over traditional areas like DCF, DPH, and DEMIS. So, you know, that, like I said, I could go on and on, but
can you share
that's a big piece.
Can you share with people what it is that you do?
Oh, sorry. Okay. So in my current role on the road to economic and social justice, I'm currently a university Title IX coordinator and diversity director. I was a Title IX coordinator at a previous institution. And prior to that, I practiced as an attorney doing criminal defense work. And when you talk about the childcare piece of it, it's glaring how often and how easily we criminalize the lack of childcare, because you can't bring your kids to court, but you got to show up to court. But you might get a court case if you can't afford to take care of your kids.
We get it on both ends. Wow, thank you for sharing that. This is important. So Dana, I'm going to come to you, and the question I have is, what are some of the challenges you have faced as a leader in your industry, and how have you overcome them?
So just to piggyback on some of the things, and for those who may not have heard my intro, I am an IT professional. I've actually worked the majority of my career in human resources technology. So I have seen those statistics at various companies on just the various positions and the percentage that are held by men versus women, and the different levels, when we say job levels, that women are at in the same position versus the job levels that men are in for doing the same work. I'm trying to put this in a very politically correct way, but I won't sugarcoat it. I do feel like as women, we oftentimes settle for what is given to us instead of negotiating. There's nothing wrong with negotiating your job level, your job pay. You don't have to always accept what's put in front of you. But also as women, we know that we need to provide. We know we need to put our children in childcare. We know we need to go to work. We need to show up to any mandatory appearances, whether it's court, work, or anything else that's going on in our lives, while we're still taking care of our children and putting food on the table and putting a shelter over our heads. So sometimes we do tend to settle when we don't necessarily have to. So just some of the challenges that I faced over the years is that being an IT professional, there have been numerous times that I've been the only woman in the room. Out of a 3,000 person organization, one of very few women and the only African-American woman. And it is, it's an interesting place to be in, because as we all know, or as we all should be very much aware, women are judged very differently than men, especially when it comes to being in the IT area. We can't necessarily come in and be overly emotional. We don't want to be too nice because then people don't respect us. We don't want to be too aggressive because then no one wants to work with us. As we have to take all of these things into consideration while we're at work, these are often things that men don't have to deal with in the workplace. So just some of the challenges I face on a day-to-day basis is, I don't want to come off too arrogant. I don't want to come off too educated. And we're talking, this is 2021, but yet these are all still very real things that go on in the workplace, especially being in a male-dominated industry. But I surround myself with strong women, like the women on this podcast, the women in my family, friends, family, colleagues. You just need to really build that very good support system around you, and you can't be afraid to keep your circle small. There's nothing wrong with having a colleague that's not in your inner circle. And it's very important to surround yourself with people that are interested in uplifting you and empowering you to make these decisions in life that will affect you and your future generations to come.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that. Sounds like there's a lot of navigating that has to go on in your industry. Wow.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
Just it'll be real quick. I just want to echo that like dual fight of childcare and loans, right?
Student loans, right? Yeah.
It totally resonated with me, Dr. Vernal, because I am on the loan end of that. So when we talk about pay gap, absolutely, Black women, right, we're the most educated in the United States, according to the reports, right? But we hold the largest amount of loan debt. I mean, right? So like, what is really the quality of life, right, after you have received all these advanced degrees, right, and you are buried in loan debt? And I am at a point in my life where I can verbally articulate that I have crippling loan debt, right? 6-figure loan debt. And so, this is something that is, a lot of women are at this intersection and crossroads, right? Of, having these great jobs that we're passionate about, right? But really having this dual fight of making these hard, really trying to navigate, right? Having issues like childcare, loan debt, right? This is kind of, the barriers that really kind of amass themselves and compound themselves. I mean, you really hit home when you said that. I just wanted to amplify that. So thank you.
Sure. I was actually going to come to you for the next question, and it's, how do you think political and community organizing will impact Black communities? What systemic changes do you foresee? And it sort of builds on what was done, what we've talked about before. So I'm going to come to you and then go to Fiona and Joanne. I forgot. So Brittany, would you like to start?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just go back to what I said about, I think that there's like really, in terms of addressing these intersectional issues, institutional, structural issues that, impact us, I think we have to build our own agenda, right? And I do agree what has already been said about, not relying, right, on those in power, right? But informing our own agendas that center our issues. So whether we're talking about childcare, whether we're talking about the Black mortality crisis that we're in, whether we're talking about educational, the criminalization of our kids and the education. I mean, there's just so many issues that are oftentimes on the margins, right, of our movements, right? I can think about even very specifically, we can talk about Black Lives Matter, right? But are we talking about all Black lives? Are we looking at the Black LGBTQ community? Are we looking at the disabled community? And so I think we really need to build our own agenda and be at the center of it, driving the agenda that we push forward that gets at that intersectional space. And let that drive policy. And then also, particularly for Black women and other women of color, we need to run for office. Representation does matter, but our voices need to be centered. And that also comes with, challenges, right? To run for office, right? You can think about childcare, you can think about the finances and all of those things that impact us. But this is where community steps in, and this is where you build that team. You build women coming together. You build the communities coming together, bring in the community members, right, to help you push that person forward, to help you ensure that sister has the support that she needs so she can run for office. So I think, we deserve to be there. And so I think those are the three things that I would like to see going forward.
Great. Thank you for that. So Fiona?
I asked Joanna to go before me.
Oh, okay.
I love everything that you have to say, Fiona, and everyone else on here. I appreciate the honesty and, being politically correct, but still not suppressing what really needs to be said is important. So going off of community organizing, I know Stacey Abrams' efforts with grassroots organization and what she started in Georgia after 2014 was vital. And I really hope that we learn from her in all of the states across America. And I always said, just because Connecticut's a blue state doesn't mean there isn't work that needs to be done here. I was actually, so being Caribbean, I always had more than one job. So I don't know if that's going off of like not the gender gap, pay gap and everything. Like during the summer, I was on furlough from my first job because I work at a gym. So I picked up an enumerating job with the census. So I was enumerating down in this area in the north end of Hartford and Parkville, all over Hartford pretty much. And I don't mind because I grew up here and I've always canvassed for local candidates and, both of Obama's elections. So I like talking to the community, and I also train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I know situational awareness. So I don't mind going out door to door. It's actually a good way to read how people feel about the government. And there was a lot of mistrust I found at the doors while enumerating, especially when I was knocking on doors of immigrant families. They were fed misinformation, as you may know, with the administration telling them that they were going to report their status if they filled out the census. So unfortunately, since the Hartford had like the lowest number of census reporting, I think nationally, like one of the lowest towns. So as Brittany was talking about and what you mentioned in your question, community organizing on a grassroots level, whether it is, doing what Shanice had mentioned with, going to your neighbor and seeing if you want to start, a local farm, or organizing a group of workers or people that and letting them know that, their voice matters. If they want to go to a lobby day with you or call a senator with you, that's what Stacey and her team did. They went to every demographic, and, the saying, like, when you go to the polls, bring, 2, 3, or 4 friends with you. Little things like that, as you mentioned also, Mrs. Best, that, those little things will make a bigger impact on the long run, and continuing to do that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. So when I think about what organizing should look like now, it brings to mind the coming eviction crisis, right? It's every day we hear on the news that the eviction moratorium is about to come to an end and whether it's going to get extended, and people shouldn't have to live people shouldn't have to live like that, wondering when, if, how the federal government is going to come to their assistance. And then the other side of that coin are the alarming stories about funds actually making their way, but then these artificial deadlines for dispersing the funds when people have not been given the resources about how to access these funds, how to get the funds from wherever they are to their landlords. And so I think there is a lot of work that as far as community organizing, that has to take place around housing in general, right? So evictions, but also especially in Hartford, right? The No More Slumlords campaign, which not necessarily lost a lot of momentum, but with everybody, with sort of COVID shuttering everyone, that kind of very public, out front approach that they took to organizing was severely disrupted. And yet that connection that was made between health disparities, severe health disparities in Hartford, and the poor quality of housing and the lack, their new zoning policies, right? That was part of this campaign, but holding slumlords like Emmanuel Koo accountable. There's a lot of work that remains to be done around that to address the really horrific housing conditions that people have to face in the city. And I think the way that it intersects with the conversation we're having about evictions is a really important area of advocacy for community organizing.
Great, thank you for that. So my next question is directed at Sharice. Given all that has been said, how do how do you feel the new or the incoming administration, especially Vice President-elect Kamilah Harris, what is your expectations of her? And how can we help her live up to these expectations? So I'm going to ask Shanice and Rayna to answer that question.
Okay. So, Taryn's checking my notes here. My expectations for Kamilah Harris and how she's going to live up to those. Well, Kamilah has shown that she changed her position on healthcare for all. Now it's private insurance companies will be able to do their things. So I'm not so hopeful for the healthcare for all, but I'm still putting hope there. That we will push, and we on the ground here will try to get something there. She was a former DA. She did prosecutions, and she passed a law that criminalized parents for their children's absences if they reached a certain amount in the year, 10%, and they were fined or imprisoned. And so instead of looking at the social aspects of why families are not able to always make attendance, she's trying to solve the problem with the criminal justice system. So I'm not very hopeful for Ms. Kamilah Harris based on her track record of hurting families of color. Yeah, and one story that stood out for me was Sherry Peeples, she was a mother who was affected by this policy in California. Her daughter had missed school several times it was documented with the school that she has sickle cell, and she would be experiencing unpredictable, medical emergencies, hospitalizations, and things like that. But still, two officers and some photographers were at her door, and the officers took her in handcuffs. She's in her pajamas, and she had to fight that case, and it was a long fight. This added to the trauma that Black women are already facing. Who knows, wages missed, they're already being paid, what, 30%, of a dollar. Just, yeah, I'm not this was not what people of color, this was not what Black Lives Matter. I mean, I can't speak for all, but like, they wanted things like, they were screaming, things like defund the police. Now we got a DA. Like, this is not what, to me, the community, when I stepped out in the streets with those other protesters, it's not what they were saying. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Shanice. I mean, while on the one hand, we have a great deal of hope and we admire what her as an individual and professionally, we have to also be critical lovers, right, of our leaders and hold their feet to the fire. So thank you for starting that. Rayna, would you like to add to that? And then I'm going to go to a next question for everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I'm glad you said it because I don't want to be on here and be rude. I was aware of Kamilah, being an attorney, being someone whose background was very heavily around like kind of criminal justice aspects. I was aware of that nasty reputation. And I think it is what hurt her in her presidency. So this is what I want of her. But Shanice, I agree with you. And I am a little hesitant to kind of see what she does. My hope is that Biden will almost rein that in a little bit because he learned a very hard lesson from the early 90s criminal policies. And what it did, and even affecting him. I think it's interesting that nobody throughout this entire election campaign, he could not get off the fact that he really is the architect for VAWA, for the Violence Against Women Act. All of that money that comes through, that was his legislative baby. He could not even put that to the forefront because he had to reckon with the policies that he was passing at the same time around criminal behavior. And I see Kamilah Harris doing that. So I'm curious to see if they're gonna like get together and balance each other out, or if they're just gonna like form like, super no deviance ever, group. So I'm curious. What I hope to see, especially as someone who does work in higher education, I'd like to see an end to the kangaroo courts that are kind of being forced to be made on college campuses.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
A kangaroo court is a quasi non-state actor judicial entity. In other words, I'm not a court, but I'm going to be held to some of the standards of a court, even though I don't have the same resources and ability as one. So yes, we should all have processes, right? We all know about this. No, you just can't show up to work, act however you want to, and no, they just can't fire you, especially if you're tenured or things like that, however they want to. There needs to be a process. Those administrative processes should not mirror too closely the same amount of protections and processes that you would get in a court. Why? Because the head of HR is not a judge. You just simply don't have the same pieces. There's not the same discovery level. And that's been one of the current criticisms of Title IX. I was really hoping that with having an attorney coming on board, that they would look and see the fact that trying to educate an academic advisor on like rape shield laws and cross-examination and all of these things that they've put into it, simply aren't appropriate for a higher ed environment, or really any environment that falls outside of a judicial system. That was my big hope for her, was that administratively she could get us back to what is still a proper procedure and process for going through Title IX complaints. But the current one is worrisome. And as a side note, I really that's what really I was looking forward to. I'm hoping that that comes down the pike very soon. But what I want out of her, um, I'd like to see her, maybe recognize, okay, what I did as a DA in California is not going to work on a national level, and this is where I'm at now. I
Okay.
really does that, because if so, then we can get two terms. If they don't, we're going to turn on her, and that's my worry. I don't want, I really don't want the Black community to, what Shanice brought up. She's got to address that.
Right. Gotcha. Thanks for that. We have to be critical lovers of our leaders. All right. So the next question is: Kamilah identifies as Black and as an Asian American woman. To what extent is her presence and activities as Vice President will impact Black women? And how do you think Black women, immigrants, people from sororities, immigrants, I said that, HBCUs, how do you think, what do you think they're expecting of her and her leadership? I'm going to start with Brittany, and then I'm going to go to Dana, Joanne, and Fiona.
I think this is an incredible moment for not just Black women and girls, but women and girls of color, Southeast Asian women, immigrant women. Representation absolutely matters. But I also am hesitant to slap too many expectations on her, right? I think when President Obama was elected, that we threw this kind of, he's going to champion the Black community. He's going to win over, he's going to push us forward. And I think, like, to a certain extent, that was unfair. But then also, I also realized that these individuals are human. And just like it has just been stated, they are complicated individuals that have, made decisions, right, that not everyone is going to rally around, and they have to be held accountable. And so I think that her her presence is important. This moment is important, because we have to look at the entire journey in which she has traveled. And I understand, and I'm hopeful for the fact that I don't expect her to shoulder this all, right? That I have to do my part in ensuring that I am working not only within my community, right, but then also pushing the conversation forward on the issues that are important to me and my community, and holding everyone accountable from her down. But I will say, for example, one of the issues that I'm very concerned about is the Black mortality crisis that we are in. And one of the things that I have seen her do is push that agenda forward as a senator. Her agenda as a senator and record as a senator is something that I have been impressed with. Again, not everything, right? But I like the way, and I'm hopeful of the way in which she is able to center and push forward some of these issues that matter to me as a Black woman. And the Black maternal crisis is one of the things that I am, working hard on. I've seen her partner with Ayanna Pressley. And so, on certain issues and things like that. And so to me, the expectation is that Kamilah and the other Black women in Congress in particular, right? Like, these are women who, we can look to. They are holding power. They are in a position of power. And with that, yes, we celebrate that, we honor that, but we also hold them accountable to having these titles, to having these seats at the table. And so I think that it's an exciting time. And I know that because of this, right, that hopefully this inspires other Black women and girls and other women of color and other girls of color, right, to step forward in whatever capacity that is, whether it's becoming a community organizer, whether it's becoming, something at your school, whether it's becoming, pushing forward to run for office, whatever capacity of leadership that is, this is a moment where we can say, you know, a Black woman, a Southeast Asian woman, immigrant woman has really broken the glass ceiling. But again, I'll say this is not the destination, right? This is, you know, this just pushes us forward. And I think that she represents well. So I look forward to working with her and, you know, seeing how she leads.
Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you. I'm looking forward. I always use the word or the phrase being cautiously optimistic. So I'm looking forward to our vice president and what her initiatives are going to be. But being cautiously optimistic, as what Brittany was just mentioning, is holding her accountable without putting all the pressure. I remember when his election was announced in 2008. I was an undergrad at Fordham, which unfortunately wasn't an HBCU, and now I will give so much more credit to HBCUs after this podcast. So thank you, ladies. I just remember being able to lift my head up and walk through the streets of New York City, feeling validated in my own skin, and having been a daughter to immigrants of an Indo-Caribbean background. Because I remember after 9/11, all the racist pushback that myself and my family got, and all the racial slurs that we got on a daily basis. And my family is also very patriotic because immigrants tend to put a lot of emphasis on their journey here. And, you know, in their countries, there's also racial tension where they're coming from. And there's a lot of deaths that you don't hear about, and a lot of volatile political stuff like insurrectionists that happen on a daily basis. So going home one day after 9/11 and seeing my dad's car keyed and the American flag ripped off my house, I knew that there was something that was very wrong. And it wasn't until Obama ran that I felt like there was hope. And then this current administration happened. So for 4 years, it was kind of like PTSD of going back to what the discrimination that we had faced during that time period. So I'm hoping what Kamilah and what she does is to validate the right people in Congress, and to validate Ayanna Pressley and help them rise up and help their messages be on the pedestal, because for far too long we've been hearing Mitch McConnell's voice, and I'm sick of hearing Mitch McConnell's voice and all of his supporters. So if she can do her best to make sure the right people have the airtime that they need, that's all I would ask for.
Great. Thank you. Fiona?
I was thinking about what Shanice said way earlier with some of our questions about the limits of our two-party system. And another one of the limits of our system is that, like, we don't really have 4 years. We have 2. We have 2 years because the congression, you know, like the Congress is going to be in upheaval again in 2 years, and who knows if we're going to have the House, right? So we have a very short window of opportunity where we have the House and we have the presidency, and you know, we're even in the Senate, and Kamala can break a tie, but you know, Mitch McConnell is never going to get us to 60 votes on anything. And so that's one of the things that I think about, is the overall limits of our political system, but also the possibilities, right, of our political system, and that she's going to have to sort of walk that line between trying to be radical, but having to be pragmatic, trying to be revolutionary, but having to go incrementally because of how how our system works. And unfortunately, she doesn't have the luxury. She doesn't have the luxury. It's just not afforded to her, given all the identity politics that she embodies. When Biden was the vice president elect, no one was waiting with bated breath to say, I wonder what Biden's legacy as a vice president is going to be. I wonder what he's going to do. And so we have to be realistic about the limits of that office, the office of the vice president, while also acknowledging that there is only so much she can do, right? Yes, she might be the president in waiting, but that's a long ways off. We have 2 years to try to get something done for the electorate. And the group that I think that we haven't talked about that Kamilah has to also address is, we haven't done anything on immigration, nothing. We have no immigration bill. And the parents who've had to be separated from their children, the children who are sort of languishing in all kinds of ICE and detention conditions, like, we really need to do something about that. And I think that's really pressing, and we might lose a lot of people next time around if something isn't done to address what's going on at the border and come up with some kind of comprehensive immigration reform policies.
Great, thank you. So I have one last question for everyone. It's usually the question I close out on, and is, if you have one message or only one message to share with the world, as particularly as it relates to Black leadership or Black women leaders, what would it be? Or you could just also focus on the election and your expectations of different leaders. I just want to point out, there's a chat that says that we are very forgiving of male leaders. I imagine we're not as, the other side of it is that we're not as forgiving of female leaders. So I will start with Shanice, then go to Brittany, Rayna, Joanna, Dana, and then Fiona.
Mm-hmm.
So Shanice, would you like to begin?
Sure. What would my message be? So many. It was so hard to pick one. I have like so many ideas written down as well. But I'll leave with this. My message would be that we are powerful and that we cannot wait for our politicians to hear our cries. We must organize and take power. Yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think I said Brittany next. Yeah?
Yes, I am actually fresh off of the Higher Heights boot camp for Black women this afternoon. So I'm actually trying to contain myself because I feel so powerful and ready just to get back out there. And I just want to say, speaking very specifically to Black women, for us to recognize our power, reclaim our power, stand in our power, step into it. Black women and women of color, we are the defenders, we're the architects, we're the strategists. And I think that we just have to remind ourselves of that and recognize that this is our time. We're definitely in this national reckoning, seriously, and everyone needs to figure out where they stand. And so I just think that we need to push ahead and continue to mobilize and do what we know best to do, because we've been doing it for centuries, and know that our power will change and change the hands, right? And recognizing, speaking, and I will always go back to this, that, I agree with Shanice that we need to recognize the local power that we have right here in our communities, and we need to build that and amplify that and push that forward.
Great. Thank you for that. Rayna?
All right. The message to the world: pay Black women, promote Black women, believe Black women. We just give y'all a 3-part system. The message to us, tell you a story. Somebody told me once that it wasn't their responsibility to take care of me. And I cried. I cried the entire time while I went and got what I wanted. So ladies, we don't have to feel good. It doesn't always have to be a namaste self-care moment, but we know how to get it done, and we're not going to let go of that. What we are going to do is start to hold hands together while we go and get it done. Professor Brittany Yancey, in the spirit of what you said, this is actually the second time we've seen each other in a week because we were both on Comora's Community Conversation. So it's nice to see some of you out here. You know, we're gonna get together.
Thank you for that. Thanks. Joanna?
Thanks, Rayna, for that. I'm going to participate in Kamora's work also. She does a lot of work in our community, and I love her energy that she brings to the table. I love the energy that all of you are bringing to the table. I think that plays on what I would say in being diligent and focused about the work all of you are doing and what we bring to the table. And also just knowing that you can't pour from an empty cup. My mom always said that. My grandma, you know, most of the women in my family were the breadwinners and the ones that held it together. So knowing that women typically don't, we're trying to be nurturers and trying to fix everyone and everything. We typically don't care about, well, we do care about ourselves, but we don't take the time for ourselves. So I always joke around with Sneha about my leisurely activities. I'm usually the only person of color in some of these spaces. So I'm inviting all the people of color, Black women especially, to take up space everywhere you go. Whether it's the mall or, you know, you want to go have a weekend somewhere, if you're the only person of color on a ski trip, just be there, be present, don't code switch. It's important to raise ourselves up and raise our own voices up no matter where we are.
Great. Thank you for that. Dana?
My one message to share with the world would be protect your yeses. As we know, we are, or some of us are, you know, the breadwinners. We are the glue that holds the family together. We're providing for children. We're trying to manage student loans and childcare, and I'll even throw in there medical expenses. And sometimes we have to say yes to things that we don't want to, but it's very important in your own self-care to protect your yeses. It's okay for you to say no. It's okay for you to, you know, go on that ski trip that you want to go on and be the only person of color there and shine. So, I mean, that's just to sum it up. One other thing I will say is that we are our toughest critic. So when we think about Kamilah Harris as well as ourselves, we as women do have a tendency to judge ourselves a lot harsher than our male counterparts judge themselves. So just, you know, we're going to remember that Kamilah Harris she will be vice president to all people, not just to us. We'll keep that in the back of our minds as we have our expectations of what she will bring to America And in doing that, we will continue to do what we do locally, what we can do that's in our control. And at the end of the day, in everything you do, just protect your yeses.
Thank you for that. Fiona, bring it home.
Mine is going to be a shout out to all the Black women as mothers, because that's one of the most important leadership roles that we take on. And to conjure my mother, in this moment, because when she, as a smart young Black girl, got her dreams thwarted because there wasn't enough money for her to go to school, she said, okay, she's going to try something else. And when she ended up having 3 girls that she wanted to go to school, she tried every job, she tried every relationship, she tried migrating, she tried moving around from one state to the other, so that all of her girls could have an opportunity. And there are so many Black women, right? Their back is the bridge to the world, right? It's not their shoulders, it's their backs. We are on their backs. They are holding up the world. So they've held up the world politically, but they hold us up personally as well. So thank you to all of the Black mothers, right, who have that vision and that hope and that dream for their children. And no matter what is going on, they keep putting one foot in front of the other and they keep on trying. And as Dr. Martin Luther King said, when they can't fly, they run. And if they can't run, they walk. And when they can't run, they crawl. And that's what Black women do to hold us up.
Thank you guys so very much. This is a day celebrating Dr. King, and I think we did him justice today. I think he would be proud of you all. And as somebody said in the chat, Black women are truly a divine gift, goddesses. That's an excellent way of ending. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing you guys continue to do the work that you're doing. It's very, very important work.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. I hope to see you on another panel.
All of you are so inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great sharing space with all of you. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Cheryl, was there anything you'd like to share? I know you were in the audience. This is a friend from New York I invited.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I came on late. I had another conflict, but I'm so glad that I decided to whatever I would catch, because this was really very, very inspiring. And the words that you said about our mothers carrying us on their backs. I mean, you talk about your mother moving here and there. My mother migrated. I'm from Belize, and she came over here so her children can have, which, for her would be a better opportunity. So this was great. I really, really appreciate you always inviting me to stuff, Christiana, and I will always be there as much as I can.
Thank you so much. And Heather, would you like to share some last words based on what you've heard?
Yeah, I thought that it was an excellent conversation, and I too agree that we need to uplift, support, and pray for our newly elected VP, Senator Kamilah, and also pray for each other in the work that we do, so that we can, make a difference amongst one another. So we need to pray for each other as well.
Right. Thank you all so very much. Have a great day, rest of the day.
Oh, I wanted to give a I want to give a shout out to Mercy and Amani. They had Professor Vernal, and so they wanted to see her here, and so they're here. Yeah, so you all are very inspiring.
Great. That's good. That's wonderful. Excellent. So I will be in touch with you all. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Yes.